Filippo Grandi, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Welcome to Al-Arabiya, sir.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to start asking a question about the biggest challenges facing refugees and displaced people in our world today.
If I have to define it in one sentence, is the inability of the international community to resolve crisis, especially wars, especially conflicts. We see this paralysis everywhere, from Ukraine to Gaza and Palestine, to Sudan, to Congo. And it is these conflicts that produce millions of refugees. And if the conflicts don't finish, the refugees cannot go back to their homes, which is what most of them want to do. That's why Syria is important today, because we hope that people can go back. This is why it's good that the US has sponsored an agreement between Congo and Rwanda, but it has to be implemented. We need more of these peace initiatives.
You mentioned Syria. We're more than now that 2 million refugees have gone back since the fall of the former government. How are they being supported? And is enough being done for them?
This week, we will mark the figure of 1 million people going back from mostly neighboring countries. This is a lot of people from Lebanon, from Turkey, from Jordan and other countries. And then you have millions that have gone back from within Syria. So of the huge Syria displacement that we have gone through since 2011, so many times we have spoken about it, there is maybe a solution. My big concern is that the country remains very fragile. We have seen recently, I was there a couple of months ago. While I was there was an attack in a church. There continues to be instability. That's why it's very important that the international community supports Syria. Support Syria come out of the fragility and become more secure and stable. But this means many things. I'm glad that many sanctions were lifted. This job needs to be completed. Then you have infrastructure, housing, services to be rebuilt. You have security to be invested in so that all community can continue to coexist. And you have to create jobs, because without a functioning economy, people go back but have nothing to live on.
With a record displacement worldwide, is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees still able to meet its core mandates effectively?
Let me put it this way. We have suffered huge budgetary reductions this year. In the past few months, we have reduced, and we have almost completed this exercise, by 1/3 the entire organization. So we are only 2/3 of what we used to be last year. This is because of US reductions. The US was our biggest donor, but also many European countries have reduced substantively their contribution. Countries in the Gulf have not come in with comparative balance, so we are in a very difficult situation. However, we will continue to do our work as best as we can. I always say we will do less, because you can only do less with less, but that less we will do it as well as we have always tried to do our work.
We understand there are about 11 million refugees that you cannot help anymore because of the cuts.
This is an estimation. If you take the overall number of people in the world, 11 million already, we know that we had to cut assistance. You take one example that is easy to understand. A lot of our assistance goes through cash. We distribute money to refugees. This is a very practical, cheap, effective way, safe way to distribute aid. We had to cut more than half the cash assistance around the world. This means that the millions that receive that cash assistance do not receive it anymore. And these are very vulnerable people. In some places, people are so many that we have to say, if you are very, very vulnerable, we can continue. But if you are medium vulnerable, we have to cut you off. These are painful decisions.
What are they going to do?
The refugees now we're talking about the refugees that do not get support, and I can give you practical examples, many of them will move on. You see, I said it at the beginning, refugees mostly want to go back to their homes.
Yes.
But if they are not properly supported during the time when they're refugees, they'll move on, they'll try to move on where they hope to get more assistance. And especially in countries like Chad, I've seen it by myself a few months ago, they moved to Libya. And then from Libya, they try to go to Europe.
But that's also creates problems of its own.
Of course, and it creates a lot of instability. Because even if they don't move on, to have unassisted refugees in a poor country like Chad is a big burden for this country and other countries as well. So that's what I keep saying to European donors, for example. You cut development and humanitarian because you have to put more money into defense. But by cutting humanitarian and development, you create more instability that then will become a security problem.
Europe is witnessing political backlash against asylum seekers. How does UNHCR deal with that?
This is a trend that actually started exactly, if you remember, 10 years ago when Syrians and many other refugees flowed into Europe. This was exactly 10 years ago.
That's right.
And I was about to take up my own function, and this was the moment. Unfortunately, that movement was met with a lot of political manipulation. Politicians saying, look, to their public opinions, these people come here to take your jobs, to create insecurity, to change your values, and they got a lot of votes because of that manipulation. They did not resolve the problem, and but this has created a hostility that is reflected many times in the practices and even in the legislation of many countries in Europe.
In Africa, multiple conflicts are driving a silent refugee crisis. Are these being neglected compared to the Ukraine, Sudan, and other places?
Yeah, I have to say something negative and something positive about it.
Okay.
The negative is that you're right, they are neglected. We've been talking a lot about Sudan. Sudan is a terrible crisis affecting millions and millions of civilians in a horrible way. But Sudan had an additional misfortune that that crisis coincided first with Ukraine and then with Gaza. And all the attention was put elsewhere while people were continuing and continue to suffer. And you see this in many parts of Africa. The positive thing that I want to say is that in Africa in particular, countries continue to be very generous to refugees, keep their borders open. They have an understanding that their brothers and sisters that suffer from war, from violence, sometimes now climate change as well, need a place of refuge. Africans share this much more than in other countries. That's why they need support. The cuts in funding are worrying because we cannot support the countries that are embracing these good policies.
How does UNHCR deal or work with governments that they are themselves accused of violating refugees' rights?
UNHCR has a mandate that is given by the General Assembly to be the custodian of the principles of refugee protection and to have what we call a supervisory role in the implementation of the legal instruments related to that. And so in many situations we will remind governments, we cannot do much more, but we will remind governments that they're not meeting the human rights standards that are demanded by this convention that many times they have signed themselves. But I have to tell you another important thing. We are also mandated to help states solve refugee problems. This is in our statute and mandate, and that is very important because we do understand that these are complicated issues for states to handle. So we are available always to try to find solutions so that refugees are not refugees anymore.
Are camps still considered a solution, or do they perpetrate dependency?
absolutely the latter. They're not a solution. Already now for many years we're asking governments, don't set up refugee camps. They cost a lot of money, they absorb scarce resources, and after a couple of years nobody gives money anymore and they end up being places of misery. So we actually tell governments, host people in your communities, and we tell donors, in the case of poor countries, help those communities, help the school sector, the education sector, the health sector that has to absorb a larger, and this is good. Because if this happens, and we've seen it in places like Uganda, for example, Ethiopia, those are investments that stay. You invest in the school, not just for refugees, but for everybody. When the refugees go away, eventually, hopefully, that school remains. So these are more durable investments. We call them sustainable responses.
Filippo Grandi, High Commissioner for Refugees for the United Nations, we thank you for this interview, and we thank you always for your insight and your efforts to help the refugees worldwide. And we wish you the very, very best of luck for the future. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much for
Thank you.
all your support.
Thank you, sir.